Welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown-ass ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Kelly Gerner, and I'm here with my co-host, Reagan Duffy.
Hi, Kindred Spirits.
Reagan, so last time we mentioned that you and your daughter Alice are in the thick of Girl Scout cookie season. You have to tell us, how is that going? I know Alice has been working really hard, and it is definitely paying off because I have at least 6 boxes of cookies in my pantry.
Do you want more?
No, I have plenty.
So we have not quite 2 weeks left. We're down to less than 40 boxes in our personal inventory. So hopefully after the last booth, we have a booth scheduled this coming weekend, we'll be done, I'm hoping. And I won't be stuck eating 12 boxes of tagalongs. In the past, she's tried to sell 500 boxes of cookies and has met that goal. This year, I don't think she's going to make that. She's juggling like musical theater, working on her Girl Scout Silver Award project, and competing in National History Day, all in like the same 2 months. So she's had a lot less time to devote to selling. And to be honest, I've had a lot less time to devote to helping her sell. So this might not be the height of her cookie selling career, but that's fine. This is a good learning experience for both of us.
I think 500 boxes is a lot of cookies. I think even attempting that is a great win.
Yeah, she's done a good job. I think she's probably somewhere between 250, probably somewhere around the 250 mark, 300.
Is that if you sell the 40 that you still have?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
I
on
think
the
you
hook.
can do it.
Yeah. I'm on the hook for the 40 either way. Either
Okay.
I'm buying them or somebody else is buying them, because the way it works is that you put out your starting inventory, and whatever you take as your inventory, you are responsible for. So at the end of cookie season, that is how much money I owe the troop. And so either that's coming out of my pocket or it comes out of all of the money we have collected from selling the cookies. Now, they will not leave us hanging. We're coming down to a crunch. So this is the time where if we're like, we don't think we're going to be able to sell them all, we can start doing some trading within our troop, being like, I have some extra tagalongs. Does anybody need some tagalongs? And then transfer them to those girls' inventory.
Oh, got it. Right. So if one person has really been like clearing up on the, I don't know, the trefoils or something like that,
Exactly.
Then they can get everyone else's extra trefoils.
And that's definitely, this is the time where somebody's all like, does anybody have, I need 3 more boxes of tagalongs. I need 2 Samoas. Does anybody have any Samoas? And we do a lot of that trading, or get it. You can kind of like, absolutely, here, take the rest of this.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Oof. All right. Cookie season is complicated and it is coming to a close. So, kindred spirits, I think it is time. If you haven't yet, go out and support your local Girl Scouts.
Yes, absolutely. And they're loving parents who are trying so hard.
Yep, exactly.
Well, let's transition into our podcast. Today's podcast is all about girl archetypes in the story girl. As we were rereading this book for the podcast, we noticed that the girls all represent different roles. Bright, fascinating Sarah Stanley, domestic goddess Felicity King, sweet and innocent Cecily King. Those observations reminded us of our clever, beautiful, and good conversations from season 2. And we realized that The Story Girl is another book where Ella Montgomery is exploring some similar themes. So that's where we're going today. But before we dive in, real quick, kindred spirits, if you are social media people, can I invite you to follow us on Instagram? We have lots of fun over there, sharing pictures of books, info about the podcast and the Montgomery verse. Links to all of our recommendations will also be there. If that sounds good to you, come find us at kindredspirits.bookclub on Instagram. Also, if you have feedback or ideas for future episodes, please let us know. We love hearing from all of you. You can email us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram. Another way to get involved in the podcast is to review it. A 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice makes a huge difference for a small hobby podcast like us. Those sites use positive reviews to promote podcasts, and reviews will help other kindred spirits find us.
Cecily King is our kindred spirit this episode. Now, she's often overshadowed by the story girl's talent and Felicity's beauty, but she's the moral core of the group. She doesn't let anyone stay mad too long. She is thoughtful about her values, and she tries hard to live up to them. She's the kindest to Sarah Ray, and she bridges the gap between the story girl and Felicity when they argue. No one can be mad at Cecily, and she doesn't seek recognition. She rather listens to her own conscience for her decisions. One of the most fun parts of reading The Story Girl is the dialogue. And in our recap episode, we discussed how the characters really come to life in what they say and in how they interact with one another. So, for our quote of the episode, we think this about sums up Cecily, Felicity, and The Story Girl. "Just smell Mrs. Sampson's flowers," said Cecily, as we passed a trim white paling close to the road, over which blew odors sweeter than the perfume of Araby's shore. "Her roses are all out, and that bed of Sweet William is a sight by daylight." "Sweet William is a dreadful name for a flower," said the Story Girl. "William is a man's name, and men are never sweet. They are a great many nice things, but they are not sweet and shouldn't be. That is for women. Oh, look at the moonshine on the road, in that gap between the spruces. I'd like a dress of moonshine, with stars for buttons." "It wouldn't do," said Felicity, decidedly. "You could see through it," which seemed to settle the question of moonshine dresses effectually.
You really can see all of their personalities in that. Well, today for our story club, we want to talk about the girls of the Story Girl. And not just the girls themselves, but how they fit into the themes we've spent many, many episodes discussing when we first talked about the first few Anne books. If you recall, very early in Anne of Green Gables, as we first get to know Anne on her buggy ride with Matthew, Anne asks Matthew, which would you rather be, divinely beautiful, dazzlingly clever, or angelically good? She then admits that she doesn't know which she would choose, although she despairs of ever being beautiful and doesn't think she's making great strides towards being angelically good either, implying that dazzlingly clever is her only hope. We've talked in many past episodes about Anne's ideas of what beautiful, good, and clever symbolize and how she matures in each of those areas over time.
We were a little surprised to see these exact same themes resurface in The Story Girl, but as we were discussing Felicity, Cecily, and The Story Girl, we were struck by how neatly they each represented one of Anne's core values.
This is obviously a very important idea to Maud. We see that here in The Story Girl, the book she wrote after Anne of Avonlea and before Anne of the Island, these themes are so very present. And that timing makes a lot of sense because Anne of Avonlea and Anne of the Island are really where we see Anne grow up and begin to define goodness, cleverness, and beauty for herself.
Right, Anne wrestles with containing all those themes within herself, with what each means to her as she grows. And now we're seeing in The Story Girl, each of our main girls also sort of clearly represents one of these ideas. And it's not hard to pinpoint which one is which either. So, Felicity is described as being extraordinarily beautiful immediately. Our narrator, Bev, goes into exacting detail about her physical beauty. Quote, "She was plump and dimpled, with big, dark blue, heavy-lidded eyes, soft, feathery golden curls, and a pink and white skin, the king complexion. The kings were noted for their noses and complexion. Felicity also had delightful hands and wrists. At every turn of them, a dimple showed itself. It was a pleasure to wonder what her elbows must be like."
God, I'm dying. What 13-year-old boy is thinking about dimpled elbows and wrists?
I can only surmise that it is a 13-year-old boy without internet access. But our narrator, Bev, quickly follows that description with, quote, "To be sure, Felicity was a stunning beauty, but with the swift and unerring intuition of childhood, which feels in a moment what it sometimes takes maturity much time to perceive, we realized that she was rather too well aware of her good looks. In brief, we saw that Felicity was vain. Meanwhile, Cecily is good. She's described as being sweet and, quote, pretty also, or would have been if Felicity had not been there. Felicity rather took the color from the other girls. Cecily is described as having satin smooth brown hair and brown eyes, and she's a little more delicate looking than Felicity is. Whereas we hear Felicity talking judgmentally about Bev and Felix, calling Felix, quote, too fat, Cecily loyally says that they are both nice and nice looking. Bev thinks that while Felicity is prettier, he will like Cecily better. And then there's their cousin, Sarah Stanley, our story girl. She is undeniably dazzlingly clever. On that first night, as they all prepare for bed, Felix wonders if the story girl is pretty, and Dan answers, no, she isn't, but you'll think she is while she's talking to you. Everybody does. It's only when you go away from her that you find out she isn't a bit pretty after all. And then when Bev and Felix meet the story girl the next morning, the first time, Bev thinks, no, she was not pretty. She was tall for her 14 years, slim and straight. Around her long white face, rather too long and too white, fell sleek dark brown curls, tied about either ear with rosettes of scarlet ribbon. Her large curving mouth was as red as a poppy, and she had brilliant, almond-shaped hazel eyes. But we did not think her pretty.
So, our first impressions of all three girls are focused on how they look, which makes sense because Bev hasn't yet had too many interactions with them. But you can already see each of them embodying their themes already. Felicity's good looks are undeniable and obvious. Striking coloring, dark blue eyes, gold curls, pink and white skin. She's extremely conscious of her looks, dressing to enhance her coloring, careful of how she presents and how she is perceived. She's specifically dressed up to meet Bev and Felix so as to give the right first impression. Cecily's more delicate features and mild brown eyes are washed out by Felicity's beauty, but they also represent her sweet and mild nature. The story girl's looks are dramatic, if not conventionally beautiful, but it hints to her dazzling personality. She's tall for her age, her mouth is red, her hair is tied in striking red ribbons, her eyes are brilliant. She will likely grow up to be a striking adult. Now, we know from our recap that once the story girl speaks, Bev and Felix are immediately entranced by her voice, the way she makes even mundane comments fascinating. And right away, in their very first interaction, we also get to the underlying tension between not just the girls, but the themes. After introducing herself, the story girl says that she came to the orchard because she thought the boys would like it if she told them about the farm and the surrounding areas. Because, quote, I can tell things so much better than Felicity or Cecily. Do you think Felicity is very pretty? When Bev responds enthusiastically that Felicity is the prettiest girl he's ever seen, the story girl responds, quote, the boys all think so, said the story girl, not, I fancied, quite as well pleased. And I suppose she is. She goes on to say that Felicity is a great cook and she herself is not. And then quite frankly adds, quote, but then Felicity is stupid. It's not ill-natured of me to say that. It's just the truth, and you'd soon find it out for yourselves. I like Felicity very well, but she is stupid. She adds, Cecily is ever so much cleverer. Cecily's a dear.
The story girl really does tell it like it is.
She does.
So remember that in Anne of Green Gables, Anne asks Matthew which he would rather be, divinely beautiful, dazzlingly clever, angelically good, as if you can only choose one, right? That's kind of what Anne seems to be implying. And over the course of Anne's story, she comes to embody all three characteristics. The girls of the story girl also sort of seem trapped in their archetypes, almost in a way that Anne was not. And that is the source of a lot of the friction between them. It's not long before we get to know the girls' personalities, as all the cousins gathered together in the family orchard to tell stories and to get acquainted. Despite Felicity's beauty, crimson cheeks, and shining eyes from hurrying to the orchard, it's quickly obvious that she is judgmental and superior in her attitude. As the rest of the kids talk about how great Peter the hired boy is, Felicity says, I like Peter well enough in his place, but you make far too much of him, Mother says. He is only a hired boy, and he hasn't been well brought up and hasn't much education. I don't think you should make an equal of him as you do. When Peter and Felicity quarrel on that first day over his religious habits, or lack thereof, Cecily's peacemaker nature becomes obvious. Now never mind quarreling, said Cecily. You leave Peter alone, Felicity. Peter, this is Beverly King and this is Felix, and we're all going to be good friends and have a lovely summer together. Think of the games we can have, but if you go squabbling, you'll spoil it all. The story girl tells interesting stories that capture the children's imagination at once. And when the group breaks up for breakfast, Felicity asks the boys what they think of the story girl. She adds her opinion, saying, she can't cook, and she hasn't a good complexion. Mind you, she says she's going to be an actress when she grows up. Isn't that dreadful? Felicity goes on to explain that actresses are always wicked people. So the story girl can't be divinely beautiful, nor can she be angelically good. But, as Cecily reports, she is fascinating, which is clearly just another way of saying dazzlingly clever. So here we have three girls and three archetypal values. Felicity is the conventionally beautiful girl who's also good at the conventionally feminine domestic tasks, like cooking and housekeeping. The story girl is the interesting, quick-witted girl who is captivating and brave. And Cecily is the good, sweet-tempered girl who plays peacemaker among her cousins. Throughout this book, the three girls are often in opposition with each other. Sometimes this looks like the outright disagreements between the story girl and Felicity, but sometimes that tension arises simply in being compared to each other. Our narrator, Bev, for example, is constantly comparing Felicity and the story girl. Quote, "We were eating little jam turnovers, which Felicity had made for us. Felicity's turnovers were perfection. I looked at her and wondered why it was not enough that she should be so pretty and capable of making such turnovers. If she were only more interesting." Felicity had not a particle of the nameless charm and allurement which hung about every motion of the story girl and made itself manifest in her lightest word and most careless glance. Ah, well, one cannot have every good gift.
High standards there, Bev.
I mean, it's outrageous for a 13-year-old boy, but it's really no wonder that these girls are often so in competition with each other. This is what they're hearing around them.
And I think due to Cecily's goodness, she's not seeking the same sort of recognition that the story girl and Felicity are vying for. The story girl delights in being listened to. It's important to her to captivate her audience. And when she's not able to do that, for instance, when family comes to call and Felicity is lauded for being a spectacular cook, she withdraws and becomes lifeless. Likewise, Felicity enjoys being admired, dressing to enhance her looks and clearly feeling superior over other girls for that attention. When the attention is on the story girl, Felicity often becomes snappish and spiteful. Cecily seeks neither. She'd like to be a little prettier, but she's not seeking the same sort of admiration that keeps the story girl and Felicity in competition. Now, the book is narrated by Bev, looking back on his childhood from the vantage point of adulthood. So these themes are filtered through his perspective. At the end of the first morning, Bev thinks, "We like the prospect of our summer very much. Felicity to look at, the story girl to tell us tales of wonder, Cecily to admire us, Dan and Peter to play with. What more could reasonable fellows want?" So I'm wondering if Bev's gaze here sharpens the tension between these three themes in the girls.
I think it absolutely does. The girls are reacting to the external feedback they're getting. So when everyone else is telling Felicity she's beautiful, and everyone is telling the story girl that she's interesting, and I guess the adults are just sort of like patting Cecily on the head and saying, "What a good little girl," of course, all those girls are then just going to lean into that positive reinforcement. And they will be jealous of the qualities that they aren't thought to possess. So I think a lot of the tension between the girls and their perceptions of themselves comes directly from this outside influence. And I wonder if they were just sort of left to their own devices without anyone commenting on, the story girl's captivating voice or Felicity's delicious turnovers, would they be so antagonistic toward one another?
That's interesting. And maybe we'll explore this when we get to the Birch Path. I'm going to say both kind of yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, of course, all of the girls are attending to and noticing the feedback that they are specifically getting about who they are in the world and how they are valued, for sure. But also no, in the sense that one of the hard things about this age is you are discovering who you are by comparing yourself to your peers. And so even without any adults around saying, "Oh my, how pretty Felicity is. She's the beauty of the connection. Oh, how captivating is the story girl." Even without the kids mentioning it specifically, the girls are aware of how they are perceived and they are looking at each other and comparing themselves to each other because that is kind of the nature of this age and how we grow. We learn a lot about ourselves by looking at our peers around us. So, some of both, honestly.
Right. I'm thinking very specifically about Felicity trying to teach the story girl how to cook when all the adults are away and they're keeping house. And Felicity just sort of is getting increasingly frustrated over the course of the week as the story girl keeps making kind of like rudimentary
Mm.
cooking mistakes. And really, that all just becomes a way for Felicity to feel better about herself and
Mhm.
her skills and talents in the kitchen. Yeah. So I see what you're saying. Even without that external influence, they still notice the ways that they're different and are going to define themselves that way.
100%.
The three girls seem to have accepted and even internalized their differences as well. For example, after the children succeeded in getting a school library donation from the irascible Mr. Campbell, we get this little exchange. "You see," said the story girl as we went home, "you need never be afraid of people." "But we are not all story girls," said Cecily. And sure, they're not all like as brave and sparkly and talented as the story girl is, but it seems to me that they all certainly have the ability to speak to people in their community, even if they do intimidate them. But in Cecily's response, you can see that she believes that that is something only her cousin, only someone who has those attributes can do. So the quote goes on. "That night we heard Felicity talking to Cecily in their room. Mr. Campbell never noticed one of us except the story girl," she said. "But if I had put on my best dress as she did, maybe she wouldn't have taken all the attention." "Could you ever do what Betty Sherman did, do you suppose?" asked Cecily absently. "No, but I believe the story girl could," answered Felicity, rather snappishly. Now, remember, Betty Sherman is the girl who goaded the man who wanted to propose to her sister into proposing to her. And it's interesting here that Felicity thinks that the reason she played second fiddle to the story girl was because she didn't look pretty enough. She wasn't wearing her best dress. Felicity has internalized that the only thing she's bringing to the table is her own beauty. And then Felicity takes her cousin down a peg by snappishly saying that the story girl was the kind of girl who would sassily propose to a man. So, coming from upright and proper Felicity, that's not exactly a compliment.
That is not a compliment. And I think it's also implying that the story girl would have to perhaps propose to a man, whereas
Sure.
Felicity herself would never be in that position.
Yeah. So it's not just that the people around them have reinforced these specific qualities for the girls, it's that they've taken on these roles themselves and they're using it to fuel the fire of their conflicts. And then in that standoff between beauty and clever, goodness often gets overshadowed entirely. Poor little Cecily.
I know.
So we see that each girl, while embodying one of these archetypes, is also far more complicated than a single theme. And each yearns to be more, to have more than just one aspect, right? Naturally. Like Anne, all of them are trying to figure out a balance, and all of them are trying to figure out what each of these values means to them in their own lives. The story girl yearns to be as beautiful as Felicity, and not just that, but to be as useful as Felicity. Useful here being a good cook and a housekeeper. Felicity, on the other hand, yearns to be as interesting and clever as the story girl, and she often snipes at the story girl when she feels like her cousin is getting a lot of attention. Cecily wishes she was as beautiful as Felicity, too, often torturing her hair with curl papers before church to try to achieve the desired look. This quote perfectly sums up how Cecily sees herself in comparison to her sister. Quote, "Felicity and Cecily were wearing their new summer muslins for the first time and were acutely conscious of the fact. Felicity, with her pink and white face shadowed by her drooping forget-me-not wreathed leghorn hat, was as beautiful as ever, but Cecily, having tortured her hair with curl papers all night, had a rampant bush of curls all about her head, which quite destroyed the sweet, nun-like expression of her little features." Cecily cherished a grudge against fate because she had not been given naturally curly hair, as had the two other girls. But she attained the desire of her heart on Sundays at least, and was quite well satisfied. It was impossible to convince her that the satin smooth luster of her weekday tresses was much more becoming to her. It's interesting in that quote that Cecily's goodness is emphasized here to such an extent that her very features are described as nun-like. Even her little face is inherently angelic. That's all kind of feeding into this sweet, simple goodness that Cecily is supposed to embody. So while Felicity and the story girl both wish to be more useful or interesting, we don't really hear a lot from any of them in regards to desiring to be as good as Cecily. At one point, the story girl talks about wanting to be less selfish, so she is thinking about her own journey toward being angelically good. But it's also clear that Cecily sort of has the market cornered on goodness, at least in this little group.
And Cecily's goodness does get some moments to shine. For instance, in the matter of the picture of God, everyone agrees that Cecily is the one most deserving of opening the picture. It's Felicity that says, "You are the best of all of us. You open the parcel." In testament to her goodness, Cecily responds, "Oh, I'm no gooder than the rest of you, but I'll open it if you like." Both Felicity and the story girl are, let's say, very aware of their extraordinary beauty and extraordinary cleverness. And while they might recognize that bragging about it is impolite and vain, they are both confident in it and would easily accept any accolades that came their way in that regard. Cecily's very goodness means that she does not think of herself as any more moral than anyone else, even though Felicity, who is rather jealous in regards to the story girl getting any accolades, has no problem whatsoever identifying that no, truly, Cecily is the best of them. And so let's actually pause here and chat about what goodness might mean here. So we've talked about this idea before about goodness, about whether that means obedience and compliance towards adult and towards, let's say, societal propriety, or if it means a deeper moral sense, an ethical goodness. When young Anne first admits that she's not doing too well in the angelic goodness department, she is referring to her impulsivity and heedlessness, her difficulty sitting quietly, her temper, even her vain worry about her hair. Now, clearly, young Anne isn't mean or selfish or cruel in any way. And in regards to children, we often conflate goodness with obedience, how quickly they follow directions, whether or not they talk back or are defiant. But the second kind of goodness, the deeper goodness that comes from a moral and ethical place, the kind of goodness that centers other people rather than yourself, that's the kind of goodness we see Anne grow into. We mentioned in various episodes that when Anne is an adult, we see a lot more of this deeper goodness, even as she certainly becomes less impulsive and heedless. Remember Ms. Cornelia telling her that the ladies don't gossip that much in front of her because they think Anne won't approve? Or how Anne's own high standards for herself end up shaming others into better behavior and attitudes? I'm thinking of the way that Anne has such an amazing speech about standing up for the Meredith kids in Rainbow Valley, for example. So in Cecily, we have that sort of deep goodness. And while, of course, she worries about what adults would think of certain behaviors, really her goodness is about being tuned into the other children, playing peacemaker. She gets adults to stop fights, not because she wants to tattle. That's why Felicity would stop a fight, right? But because she's afraid for the boys. Cecily worries about everybody's feelings. She consoles others. Cecily is generous and unselfish without seeking recognition or praise. She sends her birthday tree apples to the local hospital, for instance. And when she thinks it's Judgment Day, she gives away a treasured possession. She leads the way with donating more money to the missionary box after they're all inspired by the missionaries who've come to speak at the church. The story girl is inspired to tell noble stories from the missionaries, but it's Cecily who puts concrete action and actual sacrifice into practice immediately. Cecily's worrying about the ethics of things, about whether something is ethically right. We can kind of look a little bit at our poor ignored Sarah Ray, but from there we have a more shallow kind of goodness. Sarah is constantly fretting about getting in trouble. And to be fair, her mother is very strict and rigid and not exactly understanding about childhood escapades. So avoiding getting in trouble does require constant vigilance from Sarah. Quote, Sarah's conscience is always troubling her for doing things she's sure her mother won't approve, but it never prevents her from doing them. It only spoils her fun. When Sarah gets in trouble, she has to read the Bible as punishment. And that is a great example of a punishment that seems like it reinforces the idea that goodness is about following directions, not about figuring out how to live a moral life. Now, Felicity does like getting in on the goodness debates that crop up. So it's not that she's completely ceding all moral high ground to Cecily. Felicity's brand of goodness is more focused on appearances, though. For instance, her objections to Peter going to church are related to his shabby appearance or her fear that he might disgrace them with misbehavior in church. And even once Peter is going to church regularly, Felicity swears she cannot pay attention because when Peter stands up, the patch on his trousers is visible to all. She's more worried about that than the arguably more important aspect of church, which would be learning about and celebrating God. Felicity also tends to pipe up about behavioral expectations to the other kids when she wants to feel superior, opining about propriety in a very know-it-all-ish kind of way.
Felicity does seem very concerned with goodness as etiquette, right? And Cecily is as well. She's interested in etiquette. But for Felicity, goodness really does come down to rule following. So we are told specifically that Felicity and Cecily read a magazine called The Family Guide and pore over the etiquette column for guidance in such matters as, quote, just exactly what kind of gloves should be worn at a wedding, what you should say when introducing or being introduced, and how you ought to look when your best young man came to see you. So Felicity is finding goodness in not just adhering to these rules, but in catching others out for not living up to her standards of propriety. It's not just that there are rules to be followed, it's also that she should be the arbiter of adherence to those rules. The story girl, on the other hand, is a lot less impressed by these strictures. She wants to be accepted sort of societally in terms of correctness, but she is also starting to question those rigid rules and wonder about what other ways there might be to live morally.
The story girl lives up to her value of cleverness because she does love engaging in the deeper philosophical discussions the kids get up to. She tends to come at goodness more from an intellectual bent, except when she decides she needs to repent after convincing Sarah Ray to disobey her mother and come to the Magic Lantern show. When she's worrying that Sarah Ray might have gotten the measles, the story girl makes a big show of atoning, eating only bread and water, refusing to play outside, putting a thistle at her back so she can't lean back against the chair. She's kind of enjoying this atonement, which means it's more about the performance of it than actually repairing any damage. But she does learn from it, so that's what's important going forward. In the realm of cleverness, the story girl truly shines. It's not just her extraordinary talent when it comes to telling stories, it's also her deep curiosity about people and their lives that lead her to collect such stories. That's a mark of cleverness. Sometimes we mistake cleverness for things like being able to memorize facts or do well in rote school academics. But truly, intelligence is marked more by a curiosity about the world, a willingness to ask questions, be open to learning, as well as the ability to take something learned and apply it in broader or deeper ways, taking learning and knowledge to the next level. The story girl really loves thinking about the stories that she's telling. What does it mean? Why do those metaphors resonate? What can she take from the stories that she's telling? And we see that she chooses stories that are metaphors for or illuminate something that the kids are wrestling with. She chooses the story of the proud princess when Felicity is being superior about Peter coming to church in patched clothing. She chooses the story of Mrs. Murphy getting 3 proposals in 1 week to illustrate the idiom of it never rains but it pours. The story girl is thoughtful in choosing her stories, which demonstrate a deep understanding of abstract ideas.
A sort of funny example of the girls and their relative cleverness is in this little vignette. Uncle Roger uses the word deviltry, and the girls' respective reactions to this evocative word that's not exactly bad, but not exactly good, is kind of a perfect illustration of the way they think. Oh, said Felicity in a shocked tone when Uncle Roger had passed by. Uncle Roger swore. Oh, no, he didn't, said the story girl quickly. Deviltry isn't swearing at all. It only means extra bad mischief. Well, it's not a nice word, anyhow, said Felicity. No, it isn't, agreed the story girl with a regretful sigh. It's very expressive, but it isn't nice. That is the way with so many words. They're expressive, but they're not nice, so a girl can't use them. The story girl sighed again. She loved expressive words and treasured them as some girls might have treasured jewels. To her, they were as lustrous pearls, threaded on the crimson cord of a vivid fancy. When she met with a new one, she uttered it over and over to herself in solitude, weighing it, caressing it, infusing it with the radiance of her voice, making it her own in all its possibilities forever. So I feel so sorry for the poor story girl here who feels like she's unable to use this especially powerful word because it isn't very ladylike. And then, of course, in contrast, there's silly Felicity, who is wound so tight by propriety that she just automatically assumes that any word containing devil must be profane. So, in this example, you can kind of see the story girl's expansive, thoughtful, creative mind at work and Felicity's more narrow perspective in sharp contrast.
Another example of this contrast between Felicity and the story girl comes right at the very end when the story girl is telling the kids about Helen of Troy and the beginning of the Trojan War. Across the hall, the story girl was telling Felicity and Cecily the old tale of Argive Helen and evil hearted Paris. But that's a bad story, said Felicity when the tale was ended. She left her husband and run away with another man. I suppose it was bad 4,000 years ago, admitted the story girl. But by this time, the bad must have all gone out of it. It's only the good that could last so long. Oh, Felicity is sure the lack of propriety makes it a bad story. A classic story we've been telling for thousands of years. While the story girl has enough sense to know that it's an old myth and there must be something good about such an old tale.
Felicity certainly does try. So I think the story girl also puts the dazzle in Anne's quote, dazzlingly clever. She's so charismatic. She's brilliant. She's so bright, but in a very showy way. What with her storytelling and the sort of like spunky way she engages with everyone, even people in the community that the other kids would be afraid of. And so, for these reasons, she's become the natural leader of their little band. And she spearheads the campaigns for the school library fundraiser, for getting Peter to attend church, and even for petitioning the so called witch Peg Bowen to release their cat from a curse. The story girl also devises their contests and their games, like the preaching contest. So, here we're seeing that the story girl's cleverness is also creativity, right? It's not just how she tells stories, it's the way she lives. She lives creatively. She's looking for fairyland. She's looking for ways to make her own existence as interesting and exciting as one of her stories.
So, Felicity is our character who embodies beauty. We've discussed how she's described as being very physically beautiful, so much so that her sister and cousin seem to pale in comparison. But in our previous discussions of beauty, we also have connected that characteristic with romance. And Felicity is really the only character in this book with even a hint of a romantic plot. In fact, it is her beauty that brings the romance to her, which Anne would totally have predicted. Anne is convinced that only the beautiful are deserving of romance. Peter Craig has made it repeatedly clear that he has a crush on Felicity. One of the first things we learn about Peter is when Dan says he wants to be Felicity's beau, a fact that Felicity is embarrassed about, in no small part because she perceives Peter to be of a much lower class than she. But we see that she will allow Peter to compliment her and will even reward him with her company when he says things she considers impressive. She walks home from the Magic Lantern show with him when he delivers a fact about astronomy. And although she draws the line of kissing, she boxed his ears when he attempted a kiss. For some reason, Peter succeeding in the bitter apple ordeal is so impressive to Felicity, it earns him a lot of Felicity's attention and admiration. Felicity knows that she's beautiful and leans into it, preferring to wear pretty clothes, feeling less powerful if she's only in her everyday dresses. And I think it's so interesting that Felicity and the story girl are not only aware of their strongest qualities, they seem to feel as though they are less capable of things if that power is muted. As we've discussed, when the story girl is in a situation where she doesn't have an audience, she is listless and dull. And Felicity is the same when she doesn't feel that she is at her prettiest, or at least isn't being recognized as at her prettiest. Felicity and the story girl are hopelessly trapped in this binary. One is clever and interesting, one is beautiful and useful. And remember that younger Anne was also trapped by this way of thinking. And it was only when she began to grow up that she was able to embody all of her values.
The ironic twist of it all is that although each girl represents an archetype of goodness, cleverness, or beauty, and although the biggest source of tension between them, especially between Felicity and the story girl, is their differences, we do have textual support that they are all capable of each of these virtues. All of these girls contain all of these virtues. Of course they do. No one is a monolith. And so it's just so interesting that they are so tied to one or the other. So we see the clever story girl play peacemaker between Felicity and Dan when they argue while the kids are keeping house for Uncle Roger. So we know she can be good. And story girl is also described as beautiful in her own way, particularly when she wears the color red, a color that is vibrant and matches her personality. Beautiful Felicity is also concerned with morals and goodness, though, admittedly often through the lens of propriety. And she is clever, right? She might not be clever the way the story girl is, but she's capable of things like cooking and baking and running a household. That takes intelligence. She has more common sense in the kitchen than the story girl, for all her intelligence, can wrap her mind around. And then sweet, good Cecily is described as lovely in her own right, and she can also be very wise in her unassuming little way. She's the one who's clear headed in a crisis. She takes care of Dan when he eats all those bad berries, but in a competent and calm manner. So, all that tension between the girls and this belief that a girl can be only one thing is disproven even in the text itself, and it only harms the girls and their relationships with each other when they believe in it. Placing the story girl alongside the early Anne books, it really seems like Maud herself had this sort of fascination with the types of girlhood that were allowed. And I wonder if she struggled with identity as an adolescent and as a young woman in the same way. Did she wonder, could she live a good moral life and still be a clever, ambitious writer? Could she be beautiful and desirable and still be hardworking and smart? Would anyone notice if she was a good person, if she was too pretty or too clever? Were these those limitations that she was chafing against in her own life? Or were they simply the kinds of characteristics that felt available to girls in her day? The same way modern day girls try to define themselves by their sort of aesthetics or their interests or their taste in music. Is all this clever, beautiful, good stuff just an average early 20th century adolescent girl's search for her identity?
Kelly, that is a very interesting question. And I'm going to segue us right into our birch path because that's what I want to talk about.
Thank you. I am all ears.
So let's talk a little bit more about identity development. So I get to put on my therapist and child development hat.
My favorite hat.
So adolescence, right, roughly the ages between 12 and 18, is widely known as the prime age for identity development. And that doesn't mean we don't have identity before it. It doesn't mean we don't continue to evolve our identity over the rest of our lives. But the focus on developing identity is one of the primary developmental tasks of adolescence. And anyone who has been through this stage knows that it is a confusing and exciting time. Figuring out who you are, both internally and in relation to others' perception of you, is a huge emotional focus. So, one of kind of the gurus of human development is Erik Erikson, and he has a stage theory for it. And at the adolescent stage is what he calls identity versus identity confusion or role confusion, which means that if you successfully come through the other side of this stage, at the end, you'll feel a strong sense of identity, a sense of self that is stable no matter who you are with or what you are doing. And that includes developing feelings of independence, of finding a place in society on a bigger level. If you are not successful in coming through it, you will continue to feel muddled, continue to feel not at home within yourself, not sure of who you are, not sure of where you are going or what your values or goals in life are. So you want kids to have lots of opportunity to explore identity, to try on different roles, to have different kinds of relationships, to discover interests and develop values and goals. It's a lot of trial and error. It's supposed to be. If you remember back to being a teen yourself, that often feels destabilizing and confusing in the short term. All of that trial and error is really hard to be in the middle of.
And it's kind of hard to watch too. You're like, well, who is this kid now?
I always would use this example when I would talk with parents about teens. I have a wonderful cousin and we are 12 years apart in age, but we're quite close. And when she was a teenager and I would go every summer to Rochester to visit, those couple of years in her life when she was a teenager, we would always joke, I'd be like, which Trisha are we going to get? There was the one year that she was a very preppy cheerleader with like the perfect eyeliner and the cheerleader bow and the preppy aesthetic. And then the next year she was like the hippie girl and she had like her hemp necklaces and her tie-dye, right? Like she was exploring her identity. And because I only saw her once a year, it was very clear that each year she was figuring out a different piece of herself and trying on a different identity. So the teens are very aware of and are very influenced by their peers during this time because they are becoming aware of how they are perceived and what roles they play outside of their family. And of course, that's why friend groups are so critical. Finding friends with whom they feel safe and accepted is crucial to building solid self-esteem. You'll often see teens trying on these different identities, and sometimes it seems like they're performing a role or making a piece of identity into their entire personality, and that's part of the process. The metaphor I like is, when somebody is an artist and is becoming an artist, they often spend their early years imitating particular styles of artists that they admire. They're trying their hardest to replicate someone else's style or technique. But over time, they will begin to pull different pieces from each of those other artists and combine them along with their own vision into something that becomes authentically and uniquely their own. So it starts off as imitation and it develops into something that becomes authentic as they pull the pieces that really resonate with them.
Oh, I love that metaphor. I feel like I can see those threads kind of come together even in my own life.
Yeah, and so that's true for identity in the larger sense. There's very much an external part of it. That's why you'll see groups of teens will often share a very strong aesthetic together, right? It's kind of a stereotype by now. You've got your goths and your jocks and your preppies and your academics, and each of them have kind of a similar style of dressing and similar hair and makeup. That's a way of trying on and signaling identity. Even the kids who opt out of styling themselves, that also becomes their identity, right? That
Ah.
says something about who they are. As we were discussing about the way that Felicity, Cecily, and the story girl might be influenced by the feedback from others, that's true. As you're developing identity, you're paying attention to what others notice about you and you're incorporating that into your identity, whether you are rejecting it or you're integrating it. Now, over time, teens become less rigid in how they present or how they need to identify as they develop kind of into their own authentic and unique self, and that's more stable and true. Once they do that, that lets them kind of develop consistent loyalties, values, and relationships. Their identities can handle contradiction and nuances and find a core of authentic self. If you have not seen Inside Out 2, that is a movie that does a great job of kind of illustrating that process, right? Of going from kind of a rigid sense of identity to something that is more flexible. So you'll notice that the kids in the story girl are primarily concerned with each other's opinions. They're more easily hurt by each other or other peers at school than by the adults. They are drawing comparisons to each other and between each other, noting who is good at what, jockeying for recognition, who is right, who knows best. Part of the reason that Felicity and the story girl come into conflict so often is that they both thrive in positive attention from others, and there's only so much attention to go around it in any one moment, right? You'll also notice that they have lots of debates about religion and ethics. What is okay to pray for? What is proper? What is right? And that's because they're in the process of developing their own value systems. They're testing it out. They're taking what they've been taught, but applying it to new and novel situations, seeing what they think about it then, what's holding up for them in these new situations they're encountering. You can also see that the younger girls are much more concerned with rule following and getting in trouble than the story girl, who is a little older. And so her moral thinking has had time to develop a little bit more. And then with identity development, you'll also see that younger teens, this goes to how we were talking about how the girls were quite more rigid in their identities of beautiful, clever, and good. And you'll often see that with younger teens, as they're trying to figure out their role in a social group, sometimes it feels like there's not enough identity to go around. Like if your thing and someone else's thing are the same thing, then there's kind of a competition to see who is the most of that thing, right? If you're the smart one, there isn't enough room for me to claim the identity of smart without competing with you, even though there's no limit on smart. We can all be smart. But when you're talking about who that identity belongs to, it often feels like a competition. Identity feels kind of all or nothing, and it takes maturity and confidence to realize that other folks' identities are not in conflict with yours. I mean, you see this with groups, right? She's the athletic one, and she's the smart one, and, she's the responsible one, and they kind of divide up the identities.
I feel like sometimes you even see this among adults, maybe adults who are not super confident and maybe
Yeah.
adults who lack some self-esteem. But sometimes you see this with folks where you say, oh yeah, I'm a big fan of whatever, some
Mhm.
fandom. And then you get someone who wants to prove that they're a bigger fan than you. And you're like, dude, I just like those books. I don't know what to tell you.
Exactly. Have you read all of them? If you haven't, then you're not a true fan.
Kindred
100%.
spirits, kindred spirits, rest easy that we are all claiming the identity of kindred spirits and fans of Anne and Ella Montgomery here. There's no competition.
Exactly. So that's very much what you're seeing happening with these girls, right? If the story girl is the clever one, then there's no room for Felicity or Cecily to also feel clever without being in competition with the story girl. In family groups, I often have to tell parents about kids will infer some of those things, even if you don't think you are comparing your children, kids will draw inferences by the way you talk about them and their siblings.
Yeah, they're going to fill in the gaps of what's
Mm.
not said, right? I
Right.
mean, I recognize that from my own sibling relationships with my brothers, right? It's not necessarily reflective of what's true. Same as in our discussion of these girls, it's not as that only one can be clever, one can be beautiful, and one can be good. All three have all those qualities. But when someone is really just feeling, when it feels like one of these kids is taking up more of the air in the room when it comes to that characteristic, the other kids are like, well, how could I even compete?
That just kind of being in the same space with the sibling, they naturally are comparing themselves to each other. And then once a parent says, oh, Kelly is so responsible, what your brothers hear is, Kelly is so responsible and you aren't. Even if your
Yep.
parents don't say that.
Yep.
Well, if we go back to our girls here, we can see that our girls in this book are starting to try to push the boundaries of their own little boxes, some of which they may have self selected initially, but all of them want complexity and nuance in their identity. That's that growing to develop your sense of self, right? Felicity wants to be beautiful and fashionable and recognized as an excellent cook, but she also wants people to look at her the way they look to the story girl for her thoughts and opinions. Cecily might be the moral center of the group, the one who can usually be counted on to think unselfishly, but she still wants beautiful curls. And the story girl wouldn't give up any of her talent or intelligence, but she would like to be as good at practical tasks too, and she'd like to be admired for her beauty as much as Felicity. It's hard enough to wrestle with your own insecurities and sore spots, but then to be in stark comparison to someone who represents everything that you want for yourself, well, it would take someone far more self possessed and mature to not be drawn into jealousy and competition. And that's why teens get the unfair rap as being exclusionary or being jealous or catty with each other. I think especially girls get that reputation. It's not so much that they're naturally catty with each other, it's that everybody is doing this wrestling and comparing themselves to the other peers around them and drawing conclusions and not always handling it super well. We can see that with Felicity, right? We can see that with the story girl. They both get snippy when they're feeling that comparison. Well, if you've got a teen or shortly will have a teen, here's my 5 cent advice. The important thing is just to provide them lots of opportunity to experiment without commentary from parents and to try on different identities while being able to come home to acceptance and warmth and support. And you guide by asking questions and inviting their thoughts and opinions rather than just telling them what to do. And you can help them process events and figure out what they learned from mistakes in the aftermath rather than preventing them from making mistakes at all. Don't take their new focus on peers either. Don't take it too personally. It's not you, it's the stage. It's easier said than done sometimes, and parenting a teen can be tough on your ego, but watching your kids grow and become their most authentic selves is so rewarding too.
Reagan, this was so fascinating. I mean, I certainly remember all those bumpy adolescent years myself and trying to figure out who I was. Thank you so much.
Oh, happy to.
So, we are going to move into our inspired by section. And today we are inspired by the products we loved as adolescents and the versions of those products that we are now using as adults. So,
This is an amazing trip down memory lane.
yeah. I would like to take a moment to light an overpoweringly scented candle in honor of the memory of Juniper Breeze, one of Bath and Body Works' 90s fragrances and my signature scent throughout middle school.
Oh my God.
I love that stuff. But I also think that I wore Juniper Breeze in part because not too many other girls did. So again, the identity thing coming back up. Sun Ripened Raspberry was the clear favorite when I was a kid. And so I wanted to be a little bit different. Thanks for absolutely nothing, 90s Bath and Body Works, because now the version of like a fresh woodsy body lotion scent that I love is Joe Malone's Wood Sage and Sea Salt. It's gorgeous. It's so refreshing. It's grounded. It's light. It's exactly that update of Juniper Breeze that you want. It is also $70 a bottle. So
Uh,
thanks for nothing, Bath and Body.
we do miss the Bath and Body Works prices.
We certainly do, especially from the 90s.
Oh my God. As you are talking, I literally had a full body flashback to, I think, being in the back seat of a car with the scent of sun ripened raspberry just
Yep.
like filling my nostrils from everybody's body sprays.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I can smell it too.
I know. My signature scent as a younger teen was Love's Baby Soft Rain. Not the pink Baby Soft, but the blue Baby Soft.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I still love a clean rain scent. So again, right? Like these kind of stick with you over
Mhm.
time. Now the one that I wear that's similar to that would be Clean makes a perfume called Clean. And they have some various iterations, but I think my love of that perfume, it comes directly from Baby Soft Rain.
Look at that.
Well, I am inspired by the adolescent girl I was who was looking for a mascara that didn't leave a raccoon ring around her eyes, especially because I wore contacts.
The eternal struggle.
Yes. So I am going to recommend some tubing mascaras, which was a technology that was not available to me at the time. If you don't know, tubing mascaras have some kind of wizardry and they form a little tube around each lash so it doesn't rub or flake off during the day, even if you have oily skin. And do
Reagan, is it wizardry or as Uncle Roger would have it, is it deviltry?
maybe some of both. But you know what? I am willing to accept the deviltry of this. And there's some kind of magic to it because it stays all day, it doesn't rub off, but when you wash your face, it slides off easily with regular soap and water. And it comes off in tubes instead of smearing. It seems like you're pulling little lashes off, but it's just the tubes just slide right off your lashes. I don't know how it's done. It's great. You don't need any special eye makeup remover. You just wash your face as usual. It is the best. So my favorite, more expensive tubing mascara is the Thrive Cosmetics Lash Extensions Mascara. But I recently discovered a great drugstore alternative, which is the Milani Highly Rated Lash Extension Mascara. That's very similar to the Thrive Cosmetics on my lashes. And e.l.f. also makes one called Lash Extender Mascara, and that's also pretty good. I'd say that the e.l.f. Lash Extender is more natural and subtle than the Milani or the Thrive, which are maybe bolder mascaras if you want a bolder look.
Okay, I have to try that Milani one because you're right. The Thrive is good, but a little pricey.
I also polled my adolescent girl about what she would recommend in this area. And she says that she is loyal to the Trader Joe's Brazil Nut Body Butter and Body Spray, which I guess is a dupe for the pricey Sol de Janeiro Bum Bum Cream. Boom Boom Cream. How do we pronounce
Something
that?
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank goodness she is a kid who does not mind not having the name brand because the Trader Joe's version is extremely reasonably priced. You can usually only find it during the summer, but sometimes they have like gift sets at Christmas time. So we stock up during the summer. And it's got kind of this like salted caramel gourmand kind of scent going on, but it's not too overpowering and cloying. I like it too.
That also has kind of like an interesting like nutty note to it,
Yeah.
right?
Kind of
Yeah, so
grounds
it's
it.
got that like caramel but also nut. It is a really nice fragrance.
It's lovely. I like it a lot too. So she's got
Yeah,
good taste. And I,
definitely better than Sun Ripened Raspberry.
oh God, for sure. Well, thank you for joining us on that little trip down memory lane, Kindred Spirits, and for the whole episode. Just a reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast, please tell your friends, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Pocket Casts, or share our podcast on your social media feeds. Those reviews help new kindred spirits find the pod and share the love of all things Ella Montgomery. If you do review or share the podcast, we have a little gift for you. We will send you a lovely Kindred Spirits Book Club sticker, perfect for your e-reader or water bottle, to say thank you. Just send us an email at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram to let us know that you reviewed or shared the podcast. Next episode, we will be continuing our discussion of the story girl, and we're going to be looking at the role that religion and faith plays in the book. So thank you for listening, Kindred Spirits.
Thank you, Kindred Spirits.